Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. As I mentioned yesterday, November 17th in New York City, we're having our 14th annual roast, and we will be roasting the greatest living Jewish hero, as far as I can tell, Natan Sharansky, thus raising the eternal question, how do you roast the greatest Jewish living hero? Well, you're going to have to come dig deep into your pocket, dig deep into your wallet, dig deep into your heart, and hear just how we pull it off. If, in fact, we pull it off. Details to come. Go to go to commentary.org/roast for more. And in present at that proceedings, as they are almost every day, we have executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist and director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matthew Cottonetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Matt, you were stirred, I would say, to some emotion yesterday in general, and today you, I believe, are stirred. Renewed. Energetic Cottonetti is
John,
about to talk to you. Yes,
you're turning into Biden. It was
because
Monday.
It was Monday.
It was
Monday. I'm sundowning. It's 8:40 in the morning as we do this.
You're already done.
And I am sundowning. I will tell you the other sundowning detail, which is that I almost said that this was the Time Magazine daily podcast as I started because I have Time Magazine in my head because for the first time in roughly 75 years, Time Magazine has a newsworthy moment on its cover with an interview with Joe Biden that is, I believe, the event I thought would trigger basically a Cottonetti solo podcast, a Jonah Goldberg-like 3-hour rant that I think you can commence.
I don't know if
right
I can.
It's going to be the Cottonetti version of the Iran missile and drone attacks. 300 ballistic Cottonettis coming down on the head of.
All right.
Of course, that attack
now,
failed. So once again, the expectations are too high here.
Okay,
I do want to talk about the Time Magazine interview with Joe Biden because Time Magazine, which you were a former employee of, John, burst
40 years ago, but yes, thank you.
Burst into the news a couple months ago, late March, with their interview of, or maybe it was late April, with their interview of Trump on the cover. And there, the actual substance of the article, I didn't think was that alarming. Trump expressed that he wanted to, impound funds that Congress appropriates. And obviously, a big part of any second Trump term will be his attempt to change the nature of employment in the federal service, the federal workforce. But a lot of liberal commentators got all riled up about the transcript of the Trump interview with Time Magazine in late April. And now we have the mirror image of that kerfuffle with President Biden's interview with Time Magazine just last week. And then they released the transcript as well. And I have to say, I read the transcript and I was a little bit shaken by the fact that Joe Biden is the president of the United States, because the transcript is a document of a bitter person who is also extremely confused and has a chip on his shoulder that's about the size of the Marianas Trench. And it's just a fascinating thing to go over. And I don't want to belabor it, but I will just pull out one comment. There's obviously, we can talk about another comment where he basically blames Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, for the fact that the Gaza war is now going into
ninth month,
right? Yeah, since October 7th. But then I just want to read this answer in full. So the Time Magazine reporter asks, if you do win in November, Mr. President, with a mandate to continue your approach to foreign policy, what would your goals be in the second term? Pretty simple question. That's my editorializing. And here's Biden's response. To finish what I started in the first term, to continue to make sure that the European continent, I'll tell you, I got a call from Kissinger about 10 days before he died, and he used the following comment. He said that not since Napoleon has Europe not looked over their shoulder at dread with what Russia may do. Until now, you can't let that change. And he goes on. The point is, we have an opportunity to have the decisions we make in the last couple of years in the next 4 years are going to determine the future of Europe for a long time to come. And that's why we cannot let NATO fail. We have to build that both politically and economically and militarily, which we're investing significantly. In addition to that, I'm desperately focused on making sure that we deal with what they're calling the South now. There are going to be 1 billion people in Africa in the next several years. We have to be a catalyst for change, for the benefit, for the better. We have to help them build back better. I just noticed that for the first time while reading it. Sorry. We have to help them. We, on the climate side, this is the president of the United States, have come along, and we've done everything that is reasonably. And 3 other countries are the reason we're in the problem we're in. What? That's me. But what happens if all of a sudden on the Amazon, remember, we started a paragraph ago in Africa, but now we're on the Amazon. They're starting to clear vast swaths of land, cut down the forests, etc. Back when Dick Lugar was alive, he and I started something back in the 90s where we said, late 80s, where we said in the Amazon, they said, look, if you will make a deal with you, Brazil, you don't cut your forest, we'll pay you not to do it. We'll pay you not to do it. We have to prevent. And that's why we're working so hard to make sure Angola, okay, now we're back across the Atlantic again, can be in a position that they have more solar capacity than almost any place in the world to help that whole continent. That's why we want to build a railroad all the way with others in Europe, all the way across the continent. Which continent, John, is he talking about? We're on 3 continents now. We started in Europe, then we went to Africa, then we went to South America, and then we're building the railroad across the continent. Which one? Europe?
Australia.
Australia.
Obviously Australia, because Australia doesn't have a railroad all the way across Australia.
This is one answer.
Maybe it's Antarctica. If that would be a challenge for the 21st century. We need to build
picture him
better
looking at a risk
Antarctica.
board before
this
he makes
is one response.
Yeah.
And it's not even the most, politically important response in this long interview, but it's so revealing of a deeply confused person who sits at the apex of power in the United States government. And as I said, I finished the interview and I said a little prayer for this country because he's president for at least another 7 months.
Can I add the following detail from the transcript on the confusion, both bad policy and extraordinary confusion mixed together in an unholy stew, shall we say?
Yes.
This is on the question of tariffs.
Oh, yeah.
Most economists, the interviewers say tariffs raise prices. Biden, they do. Cumulative inflation means that prices are up 18% at least since you took office, and wage increases have not kept pace. Since who took office? Since I took office? Yeah. Cumulative inflation means prices are nearly up 20% since you took office, and wage increases have not kept pace. Biden, wage increases have exceeded what the cost of inflation, which you're talking about as the prices that were pre-COVID prices. Pre-COVID prices are not the same as whether or not you have corporate America ripping off the public now. You have everything from shrinkflation to what's going on in terms of the way in which they're artificially moving significantly to increase their profits. That's not the same as inflation. That's price gouging. But Mr. President, won't your newly announced tariffs raise the prices on American consumers? No, because here's the deal. There's a difference. I made it clear to Putin from the very beginning that we're not engaging in, for example, Trump wants a 10% tariff on everything. That will raise the price of everything in America. Editor's note. Biden appeared to mean Xi here, not Putin.
By the way, he concedes the point of the reporter in that last sentence when he says Trump wants a 10% tariff on everything that will raise the price of everything. That's what the reporter is saying. Your tariffs raised prices.
Yes, you just imposed
which
tariffs.
He denies because he made it clear to Putin. Of course, earlier in the interview,
well, maybe he was raising prices in Angola
to
build the railway.
Building the railroad.
Yeah. So
remember though, earlier in the interview, on 2 occasions, he says Russia invaded itself.
Yes.
Russia before they went into Moscow. I mean Ukraine.
Okay, so as we have determined at the beginning of this podcast, a person can slip up on dates. A person can almost mention Time Magazine when he wishes to mention Commentary Magazine, though that would be a pretty astonishing category error if such an error were continued along the road more than 5 minutes, and I didn't do it. But I'm 63, he's 81, and yes, I do this a couple of times a day, as my kids never fail to point out whenever it happens that I use the wrong word or I say something is Friday when I'm talking about Tuesday or something like that. So everyone has to have a certain degree of both sympathy and take a certain measure of understanding that this is what people are like. But something else is up here. His mind is disordered. Now, I don't mean disordered like he's a schizophrenic. I mean that he is not thinking coherently or in a linear fashion as he attempts to communicate with the American people through the media. And notwithstanding a gigantic campaign over the last 24 hours to have Democrats and their vassals in the media declare that the portrait that we see here, and a portrait in a Wall Street Journal story we can talk about in a minute, about Biden's diminished capacities as a thinker and a communicator, there is a very, very hard campaign on to say that this is not true. And the American people have believed that this was true for at least a year, if not more, according to polling, where 70% of Democrats said he was too old to be president. Let's not even bring in everybody else aside from Democrats. And it's the beginning of June, and if I do my math right, there are 5 months until Election Day. And this is the first long substantive interview Biden has given in 2 months? 3 months?
Since the interview with Robert Hur, the special counsel,
right?
The transcript of which reads exactly like this.
Yeah.
And remember,
and Biden, that was 8 months ago or 9 months ago.
Biden was so angry when Hur released his statement that even though Biden had violated the classified documents laws, he wasn't going to bring charges because people would see him as a well-meaning old man who's forgetful. Biden was so outraged at that he gave that slapdash press conference in the White House where he mixed up Sisi and AMLO, I think. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. The president of Egypt and the president of Mexico.
It's no wonder. It's no wonder he doesn't want the recording of the special counsel interview released. Can you imagine what it sounds like?
Well, or this recording.
Right.
Right. So
I'm not sure that there's a way to truly appreciate without watching it, but there is an episode of Craig Ferguson's late night show where he has the robot sidekick, and he brings in different celebrities to voice the robot sidekick. And for one show, Larry King is the voice of the robot. And instead of cracking one-liners in between every joke, he starts off on stories like, oh, in 1973, when I was having lunch with so-and-so. That's what the Biden interview sounds like. It sounds like somebody making a joke or parodying what a person in his situation would sound like.
Okay, so I think this is an interesting analogy because I think what happens is you're the president of the United States and enormous amounts of information are coming at you all day. You have a presidential daily brief, which is the intelligence briefing. You have people coming in and out. You want to hear what's going on with various legislative initiatives. You need to know what the latest is on Ukraine. You need to know what the latest is on Israel. People are asking for favors. Your son, you need to know what the disposition is of your son's current position in relation to his upcoming trial. What's happening with Trump? What is Trump saying that you need to respond to? So the inputs, right, are just constant, and they would overwhelm anybody. They would overwhelm anybody. What we're seeing here is the output that comes after the inputs, which is as you decline in capacity, your ability to separate out the strands of the inputs is diminished and things will start to glom together. If you know anybody who starts having memory problems or things like that, decades get confused, generations and families get confused, that sort of thing. It is a normal process. It is a normal process for an 81-year-old person. Many 81-year-old people that we know are perfectly hale and hearty and sound of mind, but still have to take a nap for 2 hours, whatever. There's just no disputing on the basis of what we're seeing and hearing that this is a real thing. I mean, I don't understand how you can say that there are moments during the day, not that we're seeing them, but let's just take it as a given that there are moments during the day in which he is spectacularly lucid and knows what he's saying and is directing things. But when that lucidity passes, and this is part of what's in the Wall Street Journal story today that says 45 people were interviewed over the space of a couple of months, and that in a weird evocation of Sollozzo's line to Michael in The Godfather, the Don is slipping. I mean, they literally use the word slipping in the headline in the Wall Street Journal. And what's striking about it is they talked to former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. An anecdote comes out of the office of the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, a couple of other people, and that you don't know what Biden you're getting at any given moment when you're going to be in a meeting with Biden. He can be great on a Tuesday and then forget what he told you on a Wednesday. He can have a meeting with legislators, all of whom are in agreement that it is important that aid be given to Ukraine and that they have come to the White House to plan strategy on how to achieve that aim. And he will sit with note cards and explain to them why we need aid for Ukraine. You know, it would be like coming to us and explaining why we need a state of Israel and reading it on a note card. Like we're there. Oh, we're way ahead of you. We're fine. We don't need the initial briefing. And what's more, it's not even his initial briefing. He's just reading off 5x7 cards prepared for him by his people.
Abe, you said something. You made a comment the other day that we should reprise. You made the comment on Twitter, but about Biden cleaning up his own messes. That sounds a lot like exactly what we're talking about. You said something. Do you remember what you said?
Well, he does these. He just.
Yeah. Do you remember, or are you sundowning?
Well, it was in reference to what he said about Bibi here, right? So, in the Time interview, the interviewer said, "Do you think Netanyahu is prolonging the war?" I mean, even the premise of the question is so repulsive and erroneous. Do you think Netanyahu is stretching out the war in Gaza for his own political protection or something like it, for political survival? And Biden's answer was something like, there's every indication, there's good reason to believe so, or something like that, right? Matt, you're muted.
Sorry. First he says, I'm not, here's the transcript.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Go.
Here's the time reporter begins. So in Israel, obviously a difficult time there. What steps are you prepared to take? What steps are you to take against Israel? I love that.
That's great.
That question. What are you going to do to really pound Israel, Mr. President? What steps are you prepared to take against Israel now that Netanyahu appears to have crossed your red line in Rafah, Mr. President? Biden, I'm not going to speak to that now because you're going to report this before I'm in the process of talking with Israelis right now. And then we go down and they continue to talk about Gaza and hunger. And then a few questions later, the reporter says, some in Israel, as you said, Abe, have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? Biden, I'm not going to comment on that. There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Like literally the next sentence after he says, I'm not going to comment. There's every reason for people to draw the conclusion that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation.
Okay, so then, I'm sorry. So what Seth's talking about. So then in a press, a reporter asked him after this if he believed that Bibi was prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Biden flatly said no. So the point I made on Twitter that says something about, I said Biden did a 180 on Bibi because Biden never knows what he's previously said until someone tells him and explains the problems he's caused and now needs to fix.
Well, even in the interview, he says the line, Hamas could end this now. Hamas could end this now. So that would assume that it's Hamas that's prolonging the war, which is correct. But he then does...
And Biden.
And 180 and says, oh, it's Bibi, even though I'm not going to comment on that. But yeah, you're right. Bibi is prolonging the war for political purposes.
But I think Abe's right that I think someone's has to tell him, you said this thing and it's really upsetting people because it's, kind of a jerk face thing to say. And, then he knows to, call Barack Ravid or whoever and, get the question again and give the answer that's probably on the 3x5 in front of him or whatever.
I think it's important also to point out that the reporters of Time Magazine, the ones who say what steps are you prepared to take against Israel, ask Biden if Israel has crossed his red line. I'm unaware that a red line has been set up.
Well, no, remember the red line was if they go into Rafah. And
they're in Rafah. So
right, but remember that was the Caitlin Collins interview. So this interview was done in between Caitlin Collins and Israel going into Rafah, and the White House saying what Israel is doing in Rafah has not crossed this red line. But that's what Time journalists were saying.
So I'm now I was going to an unfair place.
But but you're not, because the assumption in the question is Israel has crossed this red line.
Right.
Which the White House had never said.
Right. So it is very important to note that for 3 days now, spokesmen at the White House and at the State Department are trying to maneuver, and really more than 3 days, really since Thursday when Biden, announced the proposal that was going to save everything and end the war and be wonderful in every possible way, that Israel makes some proposal that we still haven't seen. Biden says, I'm accepting Israel's proposal. It is now on Hamas to do the right thing. Let's just pause for a minute and say it's on Hamas, it's on Hitler to do the right thing for the German people and stop this war before we firebomb Dresden. I mean, that is essentially the logic of what American officials have now been saying
except without the before we firebomb Dresden part.
Right, exactly. Okay, but Hamas needs to do this if it wants to help the Palestinian people. So we've moved into a deranged moment in our foreign policy in which we are urging Hamas to be the humanitarian, caring, giving, social service organization that we know in its heart it can be if it just grasps the best of what is in its heart. Matthew Miller, spokesman at the State Department, yesterday literally said something like, we think Hamas should do this because Hamas says that it's a supporter of the, goals. And, here it is. Lazar Berman of the Times of Israel tweets out the following. Pressed on why Hamas would agree to a deal that would hasten its destruction, Miller said, quote, because they don't want to see continued conflict, continued Palestinian people dying, continued war in Gaza, and the reconstruction of Gaza. Hamas doesn't want to see continued conflict with Israel. Hamas doesn't want to see continued Palestinian people dying. Where in Hamas's behavior do we see it is part of Hamas's strategy to have Palestinian people dying to place a moral onus and blacken the reputation of Israel? That's part of their integrated war strategy. They know this. They're talking about Hamas as though it is a normal diplomatic player, a nation with interests like any other nation that might want to horse trade for some goods in case it were to go to reasonable behavior. All of this is triggered by Biden's confusion, in my view, that we are all being driven crazy, Israel's being driven crazy, and everybody in the administration is being driven crazy. And we keep saying it's Jake Sullivan did this and Blinken did that and so did that. There is a person of diminished mental capacity in the White House who is capable of saying the opposite things about the signal moment on the world stage at any given moment that they then have to harmonize as a matter of public record. And it's horrifying and it's terrifying. And we're not just talking about this one thing. I mean, the interview, go through the interview everywhere. Yeah, you got Angola and the railroad and building back better in Africa, in a place where they never built in the first place. So I don't know how they're building back better. We're dealing with it. We're getting a glimpse, and this is the first extended glimpse we've had in months into what is going on in his mind. And we're in a lot of trouble.
There's one point where Biden does make a compelling argument, and that's in the exchange when the Time reporter raises the question of Biden's age, and Biden responds, I bet I could take you on. And that's probably true. Biden probably could take on the reporter from Time magazine. That's probably true. But the very idea that he has to say that, or thinks like that, or subconsciously or inadvertently resembles the Mandelbaum character from the Seinfeld show, where there are these aged people who are always challenging middle-aged people to fights, is, I think, an embarrassment for him and for the White House and for the United States of America.
And he's calling back to his salad days, right? That's the other thing, is that it's so obvious what he's doing, what he's trying to do, because he remembers that people liked the old frisky Biden, who would say, you're a lying dog-faced pony soldier, or challenge someone at a rally to push-ups, who mentioned Hunter Biden or something.
Well, that is Izzy Mandelbaum from Seinfeld. That's literally what Izzy Mandelbaum, played by Lloyd Bridges, does on Seinfeld.
Right, and it's
challenge him to a push-up.
It's genuine, is the thing. He was Mandelbaum. He is unfortunately an aged version Mandelbaum,
He's worse
would make
than
him about
Mandelbaum.
100 and 135 now. I don't know, but that's the problem, is that he remembers the good old days when he was Mandelbaum, and he's trying to bring those back.
There's another disturbing part was when he says the Russian military has been decimated. Now, this is a question about Ukraine. The reporter says the war is stalled every day. An average of 42 Ukrainian civilians are killed or wounded. Is Russia's proposal for war to end the war in Ukraine the best that Ukraine can hope for at this point? Another loaded question, by the way. Biden says, no, it's not. And by the way, I don't know why you skip over all that's happened in the meantime. The Russian military has been decimated. You don't write about that. It's been freaking decimated. Number one. Well, it is true. The Russian military has had a lot of losses, and there are a lot of equipment destroyed. But at the time that they were giving this interview, Russia was actually advancing in certain parts, not very much, but moving toward Kharkiv. And the issue with Russia is always that it has this apparently limitless supply of soldiers that it can take from the interior and move to the front. And it has done that. And so his view of the situation on the ground in Ukraine, to me, seems also just completely divorced from reality. And that, again, disturbing.
Okay, so another point about the media effort to sort of circle the wagons and defend Biden against himself was an effort on Twitter yesterday or the day before yesterday to explain that, technically speaking, Biden was correct in saying that the Russian army has been decimated in Ukraine, because the word decimation refers classically in its Roman formulation to the killing of a 1/10 of the enemy's forces. Therefore, it is likely true or unambiguously true that
Absolutely.
that decimation has
his study of Latin.
Mandelbaum knows his math. Okay.
Yes.
And his
Mandelbaum
Latin.
Yes.
knows-
Yes. Yes. So, I mean, I only bring that up to say that it is astonishing to see the thing to do in a case like this is to pass over it in silence or to redouble your efforts against Trump. It is not to say that the portrait of Biden that we are seeing here, and in this Wall Street Journal story we'll get to in a second again, that it's wrong. Because that is like Frank Drebin in The Naked Gun standing in front of the explosion at the fireworks factory saying, nothing to see here, move along, there's nothing to see here, while the sky is lit up with fireworks exploding every 2 seconds. I mean, it's dumb if you want Biden to win because you're so afraid of Trump to try to tell people not to believe the evidence of their own eyes. That is not a winning strategy. You got to come up with something else. And let's just say one thing about Joe Biden, if I could, which is he's desperate to hold on to his job that he probably is not equal to. But at least in wanting to perform his job, perform his task, he is following the important Western tradition of believing that work makes you flourish as part of a flourishing society and a pivotal component in the God-given dignity of every person. This is the theme of our friend, economist and financial manager David Bahnsen's new book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. Whether it be in public policy, in the culture, or even in religious bodies, too often work is seen as a necessary evil and not the universal blessing that it is. David argues in his new book for the economic, theological, and ontological significance of work, suggesting that it is core to our identity and that the fastest way to a failed society will be to continue professing a low regard for work that ignores our capacity for productivity, a capacity that is God-given, a therapeutic, cathartic vehicle for dealing with challenging circumstances in life, and ultimately shows that the other things we value in a well-ordered life, marriage, children, community, worship, are all enhanced when we properly prioritize and centralize work. This is a new, fresh, interesting, and important argument. You can read it, indulge in it, really get to the meat of it in David's book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. Bahnsen is spelled Bahnsen. Go get it today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever fine books are sold. And check out more at fulltimebook.com. Now, Matt, I think you and I were both a little startled by the weakness of the big story in the Wall Street Journal, the one that says the Don is slipping. Because the headline suggests that this is the moment at which the gloves are going to come off in the mainstream media.
Right. And,
about,
I get these push alerts on my phone, as many Americans do. And sometimes the push alerts are kind of random, about the latest WNBA score or something. But last night, as I was reading in bed, I got the push alert from the Wall Street Journal with the headline, "Behind Closed Doors, Biden Shows Signs of Slipping." And I said to myself, oh, wow, this is a big story. This is a big moment, because the story is released just hours after the transcript of the Time interview. There's got to be a lot here. And I have to say, I was a little bit disappointed in the story, just because I know there's more there that isn't mentioned. And the only on the record tales of Biden's decline are coming from Republicans, which, in the court of public opinion might be discounted because of partisan reasons. What's interesting is the report, as you point out, John, and I'm sure you'll mention, it seems to be like an iceberg. It seems to be holding a lot back. And they say that this article in the Wall Street Journal is based on interviews with more than 45 people over several months, interviews with Republicans and Democrats. And then it's clear, they say in the Journal, that while this piece was being reported, the White House was monitoring it. The White House was aware of this piece. And I quote from the piece, "After the offices of several Democrats shared with the White House either a recording of an interview or details about what was asked, some of those lawmakers spoke to the Journal a second time and once again emphasized Biden's strengths." And then there's a quote from Congressman Gregory Meeks, a New York Democrat, saying, they just, said I should give you a call back, which is kind of amusing, because it doesn't suggest he's really invested in defending Biden. I will say, though, the pro-Biden spin on the Journal piece so far this morning, Wednesday morning, June 5th, is that this is a partisan hit job. And that's the line coming from the White House. That line of attack may work, but it is, I think, an insult to the Wall Street Journal, because anyone who knows anything about media understands that while the Wall Street Journal's op-ed pages are famously conservative and popular because of that, the news division of the Wall Street Journal has always been fair-minded and, in fact, leans liberal. And so it's just wrong to suggest that this report written by Siobhan Hughes and Annie Linsky is a partisan hit job. It's nothing of the sort. Instead, it seems to me like a well thought out investigation of Biden's mental decline that was stymied internally for political reasons.
Listen, let's talk about Annie Linsky for a moment, because it's important. You make an important point to say that this is, a Murdoch hit job or something like that. Annie Linsky was a Democratic press secretary on Capitol Hill, who then transitioned to becoming a reporter and was the key reporter on the Democrats and their campaign to win and secure the White House in 2020 at the Washington Post, before she was poached and brought to the Wall Street Journal. So the idea that her life and her career suggest that she is, working for Mike Johnson or for Trump is preposterous. And yes, the story, if you have been an editor at a newspaper, as I have and was for many years, the final draft version of an article on an explosive and politically controversial matter, whether you're working for a conservative paper or a liberal paper or a tabloid or something like that, will often go through many iterations with people involved at the highest levels of the paper looking at the story because of the storm that it is going to provoke. And they were set on this story clearly, Siobhan Hughes and Annie Linsky, months ago. And they drafted a version of the story, which is in 4 parts and sets itself up as reports on 3 separate meetings with an introduction, at which Biden displayed what people thought in the meeting were alarming tendencies toward a lack of acuity. And it is my view, reading it, that the original draft must have been a lot sharper, because the version that is here, if this was the version that they had produced, I'm not sure they would have published it. You see, here's how institutionally it would work. They hand in a draft, they have a lot of stuff, and they're saying some of the people here are taking back what they said, or we're getting calls back to say that we misunderstood, or they misspoke, or something like that. And then the story is going to have to show a lot of, they said this, and then they said, no, they didn't say that, and all this. And so it goes through editorial process after editorial process. And what comes out is something that's pretty pablum-like, with only 3 major people on the record, none of whom is a Democrat. But clearly they spoke to a lot of Democrats and a lot of people who were in these rooms. And their information is not in the story, but their impression is in the story. So they keep saying, people in the room were disturbed when he repeated this, or people in the room were troubled when they repeated that. But everything that they were told could not be quoted, because of the initial terms that they had agreed to, which is that they would be spoken to on background, but could not be quoted and could not be named. So we are left with the penumbra and emanation that Biden is senile from the framing and characterization of the story, without the anecdotal and specific support that would lead you to say, well, they got him dead to rights.
But so that's why the Time magazine transcript is so important, in my view. That's why the Her transcript is so important, because there's clearly an effort to shield the public from Biden's state. And it's only in these moments where he cannot exert control, like in the Time magazine report, like with the special counsel, Robert Hur, that you kind of see where his mind is at, and it's scrambled. It's all over the place. And as you suggest, John, maybe that's why the policies have been so incoherent, because he himself can't even really grasp where the situation lies at any given moment, the circumstances, the correlation of forces. And again, that's why I just finished this transcript, which is long. It was a long interview, and just kind of had a moment of dyspepsia. Trump, now it's fascinating. I remember Trump gave an interview to the New York Times pretty early in his presidency from a table at Mar-a-Lago. And it too was just kind of out of control. But it's interesting to kind of compare Trump and Biden. Trump is incoherent in the sense that he skips from point to point. The mind is kind of disjointed. He'll say one thing and then he'll go to another subject very quickly. But within those disjointed moments, there's a certain logic at work. Like Trump has sentiments, attitudes, grievances, canned lines he wants to say. It's just that he's kind of all over the place. In the way that many people talk, I mean, the way that I talk on this podcast, sometimes I jump from subject to subject or rewind. Biden's incoherence is just, there is no logic to anything once he gets off the prepared line. You get situations like the railroad on the mystery continent, right? And applied to world politics or even domestic politics, the result is what we see around us: chaos.
I think for the real story that about how the Don is slipping, we're going to have to wait until people in the administration are out, it's over, and they write their books, and then we're going to know. Then we're going to know just how scary this has been. I'm not conspiratorial minded at all, but when you read things like the Time magazine interview, there's a lot of talk out there about, well, who's really in charge? Biden's not in charge. Who's in charge? How can he be in charge? I mean, I agree that the general chaos and the disorder of the policy stems from the fact that his mind is so cluttered. But you have someone or several people have to shape that clutter into a policy for the public. And that is not him. So you have to take this mess. Go ahead.
It's worse than that.
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, where you are wrong and why this is such a horrible moment that we're facing in 2024. Because it turns out that there is no such system that people can impose order on in our system. The president is a unique figure on the world stage. Complicated constitutional setup in which we have one man, one vote for the legislature that sort of represents your local area. Then we have a slightly aristocratic, not one man, one vote system for the 100 senators. And then you have every single person in the country voting for this one person. And as the Constitution sets it up, that person, from him and from that election flows the entire legitimacy and the entire power of the executive branch of the United States. And that we set up bureaucracies and we have a deep state and we have permanent civil servants who are there and they come and they go and all of that. But in the end, our system means that the person who is sitting in the Oval Office is the maker and adjudicator of policy. And what happens when that guy is doing it in an astoundingly inconstant manner? And we have two different examples of that in the last 4 years. One is Trump in 2020 in relation to COVID, the thing that meant that he lost the election because he could not get a handle on how to talk about it, how to lead, ceded a lot of stuff to Anthony Fauci on the Hill 2 days ago, lying through his teeth about everything that he did. But Trump is the one who empowered him, really. And then we have the inconstancy of Biden now. And what you then have is, I would say like a wonder rabbi in Biden and his acolytes, and the wonder rabbi has lost it, and the acolytes are still trying to make sense out of what he is saying because every word out of his mouth is delivered from God, and they can't make sense out of what he's saying because he no longer makes sense. And nonetheless, you have to make policy based on him. He's the final arbiter. He's the final decision maker. And that's what we are living through. And that, I think, is why we can have a new understanding of the difficulties of the war between Israel and Gaza. We keep saying he's under pressure from the Arabs and Dearborn. He's this. They're having this. This is happening. The international. This is a fulfillment of 40 years of policy, bad policy ideas, whatever, all of which I agree with. But in the end, on Tuesday, he says Bibi's not responsible. And then on Tuesday afternoon, he says Bibi is responsible. And then on Wednesday morning, he says it's in Hamas's hands. And on Thursday morning, he says Bibi needs to agree to the creation of a two-state solution. And on Thursday afternoon, he says, poor Bibi, he's got this right-wing flank he has to satisfy.
And maybe even the whole Rafah line, this red line baloney, that might have been totally unrehearsed. It came out in the context of an interview with Caitlin Collins on CNN, and he hasn't done many interviews with news anchors. And he just blurts it out. And from the reaction from many liberals, including his unofficial foreign policy advisor, New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, it was an own goal. It was an error. Friedman was like, oh, maybe you shouldn't have said that. So that just adds to the, and by the way, the inconstancy is not just on Israel. Think about the too little, too late applied to Ukraine consistently now since the beginning of the war. He has this bizarre moment in the Time interview where he says that the reason they released the intelligence before Russia invaded Ukraine was so that Putin would know we're still on top. But that's not really why they, at the time, they were saying that it would deter Russia from invading. And of course, it didn't deter them. Now he's onto this thing that's kind of like a chest thumping thing that we knew this intelligence, and that's why we wanted to release it prior to the invasion. It's also, by the way, the too little, too late. The incoherence applies to the southern border, where we moved from this is just seasonal migration in the spring of 2021 to the border is secure to Kamala is going to take care of it to we need Congress to pass these laws if they're really serious about the border security, to now the executive order that he signed yesterday, which is his attempt to put a Band-Aid on the illegal immigration problem. It's all over the place because he's all over the place. And it's different than a Woodrow Wilson situation, in the last year of the Wilson presidency, because in that case, it seems to me that Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, very different figure than
he
Joe
was
Biden.
A vegetable.
He was a vegetable, exactly.
He was a
And
vegetable. He literally had.
So his wife,
his brain had exploded.
Mrs. Wilson and Colonel House, they were kind of running the show. Here it seems like Biden is actually still in charge.
Right. And well, take the border.
I want to say two things about the red line thing. First is, to Matt's point about whether it was improvised. It was, he was asked in that interview, and his answer was, it is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical, so there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have Iron Dome to protect them. But there's red lines that if he crosses. And then the Journal story that recounts this ends the quote and says, Biden continued without completing the sentence. So there's no red line. There is a red line. There are red lines if he crosses. And that was the cliffhanger. So that's the first thing, is that it's everybody means different things with the red lines, but this was not a thought out, he's just trying to think on the spot. What does she mean by red line? And,
because it was such a wonderful success for the Obama administration when he announced the explicit red line that he then failed to enforce.
Right.
So that was a really great callback. Yeah. Good.
Right. And that's the other part of this, which is that, that story is how, about how Israel avoided Biden's red line in the Journal. I think that shows you the part of the big problem with this, because it's not just aides that have to figure out what he means to say. You have foreign leaders in the middle of a war trying to interpret what he says in a week old, sometimes a week old interview that's just aired today. 2 days after there have been other developments, and it's, a line like red line is dominating the news. You have people at war trying to figure out, okay, how do we shape our war strategy so that we don't cross a red line that may or may not exist for the United States? It's a global problem beyond just policymaker, like people in the cabinet.
So I have a relatively small adjacent question here. How on earth is he going to function in debates?
Well, that's going to be the thing. This is the $64,000 question. This could be the end of his presidential candidacy if he is this person on June 25th. and so just hold your breath. Like, that's 20 days from now, and this will be, and then assume that it is. Assume that it is, and you can't have people saying, well, he's really, oh my God, he's really on top of it, and he's really whatever. He does this over 90 minutes or 2 hours or however long the debate is. I don't know what happens after that. The Democratic convention is in 4 or 5 weeks. If he sounds like this, I mean, we've been in a new political reality since 2015. We really have. America has not been the same since 2015. And I don't know. I mean, could we have a new political reality after June 25th? Sure, we could. Who's to say we can't? I mean, the entire Democratic Party could have a collective nervous breakdown on the 26th of June and either say, okay, well, obviously Trump is going to be president and we better figure out how to, make sure that he's in jail with a gag order while he's president, or they're going to make moves to try to forestall this possibility.
I'm just wondering, and just sort of thinking out loud here, but have these two parties considered nominating other candidates instead of these two?
Yeah.
Well, there was Dean Phillips. There was the Dean Phillips moment. By the way, Dean Phillips, interestingly enough, the congressman from Minnesota who ran against Biden, has proposed to Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, that she pardon Trump to spare the American political system the trauma.
You know what? That's a good suggestion.
It is a very good suggestion.
I've been wondering about that. There's all this. No one has talked about Hochul's role in all of this, because you hear the line, "Oh, well, the president can't pardon Trump because presidential pardon authority doesn't extend to states and localities," but the governors have pardon authority. Couldn't she spare us a lot of angst?
Well,
simply pardoning him.
You young whippersnappers do not remember what happened in this country when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. So, and I'm not quite sure how old Kathy Hochul is, because she may not remember herself. But I do. I was 13
by the way,
or 14. That's the end of her life if she does.
No, but she would be in the history books.
Fair enough.
Because now she's destined to be completely forgotten by history, because she's just a run-of-the-mill liberal Democrat governor of New York.
Interesting. It's not going to happen, but it is an interesting thought experiment.
Interesting.
But to go back to this thought experiment then in relation to Trump, my opinion of Trump has not changed. I do think that the case is an outrage, and that the fact that it was brought is an outrage. I don't think that the jury verdict is an outrage, because I think the jury did what the judge instructed the jury to do, and therefore what the judge did was an outrage. I think it is very possible to likely that that this finding will be overturned, though it's not going to be overturned in time for it to make any difference in this. So my view has not changed, but I do think I want to ask you guys one thing, which is, I'm using the Atlantic now as my model. So the Atlantic from January 21st, 2017 has followed a relentless pattern of Trump is crazy, he's monstrous, he's racist, he's intentionally indulging in cruelty, he is empowering the worst people in America to create an apartheid society. He's a pawn of Russia. He's this, he's that. 10,000 different arguments thrown at Trump that then is part of the means that empowers the lawfare structure that has now, basically sent Trump into the legal system in these 4 separate or 5 or 6 separate cases, if you count the civil cases. Okay, so Trump gets convicted, and Trump and his people say, all right, you know what? This country has taken a really horrible turn. He didn't do anything. He's not guilty of anything. That's what we think. and they think it honestly. I'm not talking about Trump and his. I'm talking about like they believe it honestly. They think that he has been persecuted and that he has been mistreated. That mistreatment comes at the New York State level. It comes at the federal level in the appointment of Jack Smith, who's the constitutionality of whose appointment is now going to be adjudicated in the courtroom in Florida, where the classified documents case is taking place, where Judge Cannon is going to be asked to rule on whether or not there was something untoward in the way Jack Smith was appointed special prosecutor. So they're saying, you know what? This system is broken. It's terrible. These people have spent 8 years trying to destroy Donald Trump. And when he comes into power, he is going to take steps to make sure that they aren't able to do stuff like this anymore, and that the role that they have played in the federal government and in the corridors of power is limited or destroyed. And now the Atlantic and everybody else, they are now on their fainting couches because because their opponents are saying, you're the ones who are trying to destroy this country. We're going to stop you. And that argument, I'm sorry, is not insane. So if you're now going to double down by saying, oh my God, they're responding to our relentless effort, our Javerdian effort to get Trump by any means necessary by going after us later, we warned you. We said, don't go down this road. No good is going to come of this, and no good is going to come of the rest of this year. I mean, who knows what's going to happen after Election Day? Either way, if the election is close, unless somebody wins by 10 points, we are going to have social unrest in the streets from November until January again, or worse, or something like that. And I just think it's an amazing thing to see that they're now saying, how dare they have an opinion of our handiwork? They're not allowed to. No one's allowed to think this verdict was wrong. No one is allowed to say that pursuing Donald Trump in this way is wrong. Well, congratulations to you.
By the way,
go ahead.
It's too soon to say, but so far the polling that I've seen since Trump's conviction looks like normal fluctuations, down, up. There's, as I said, it's too early. There could be some big polls, in the next few weeks, but I don't. It looks like it was a sort of, in terms of public opinion, no one was particularly swayed either way. That may be the case.
I will make one
all
case.
this.
Oh, go ahead. I will make one case for the good political thing that this represents for Democrats, which is people forget things, and they even forget Donald Trump. And so what happened here? Maybe what happened is that they're reminded, so that people who are like, yeah, I forgot, the economy was good, blah blah blah, and then like, oh yeah, I really didn't like the way he behaved. I really didn't like the stuff with the porn star and everything. So it got reinforced. So Trump's negatives got reinforced. Now you can say that everybody who hates him, but there are people who maybe don't hate him so much, but they're now being reminded of something about him that they didn't like, which isn't that he used his ledger incorrectly, but is what he did with the porn star and paying hush money and stuff like that, which of course is not illegal, but is something that you are allowed to judge. Anyone is allowed to judge any political candidate for any reason. That's why we have a private ballot. You go in and you don't like the cut of his jib, or the way, or his face, or his wife, or something like that. You are perfectly within your rights to vote against him. So that's the one thing I would say in the most, in a totally negative way, even if it doesn't show in the polling.
Right. I mean, so far there have been a few polls taken, kind of snap polls, and they don't show much in the way of movement. Some have Biden up slightly. These are national polls. But again, within the margin of error, others show no change. It is interesting that the Decision Desk HQ, which is a pretty responsible and I think well-regarded election forecasting and polling firm. They came out with their latest projection for November, and they do have Trump winning the election. And that forecast is, obviously since the conviction. Right. So if something like you're saying, John, does happen, it has yet to show up in the polls. I do think the debate may be a place where people could be reminded that didn't really like certain aspects of the Trump presidency. And that's why the debate is so, I guess I had been discounting the debate, but maybe it is even all the more important now, because if it is a bad performance by Biden, it would have all the consequences you suggest. On the other hand, Trump has to let it be a bad debate for Biden. And if Trump just gloms all the spotlight, then he's playing into Biden's strategy, which is to make it all about Trump.
Right.
So you do have the circumstances for a pretty important debate, the earliest debate in a presidential election year.
Right. Trump is also going to remind people. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's also going to remind people specifically that he is a, convicted felon, as the billboards like to say now. He's going to bring it up as a, this guy puts his political opponents in jail like Putin does, sort of thing. He's not going to be able to resist, I think, that. And I think the sort of, self-martyrdom aspect of it is that Trump is going to remind people too, and they're probably counting on that. Right. That he can't not talk about this, and that he's going to be their reminder. Maybe they don't have to campaign 24/7 on what, Trump was convicted of, because maybe they just sort of set him off like a wind-up toy, and he's the one who does it.
So that's why it's so important. It is, I think, people say this hyperbolically, this, with the exception of the first two major debates of the modern era, which were the Ford-Carter debate in 1976 and the Carter-Reagan debate in 1980, easily the most important debate in modern American history. This debate is set up to be that, because we have these two inappropriate candidates for president going at each other. That's never really been the case before, and two incumbents effectively running against each other, which hasn't been the case for 140 years or 130 years. And so there's been nothing like it. And we basically are just going to hold our breath, or, and any political analysis between now and then that tries to read the tea leaves on where things are, with the exception, I think, of the question of whether the Trump conviction has any digs in anywhere. It's sort of useless because we're about to have an epical, earthquake, gargantuan political moment 20 days from now. Very quickly, I have a recommends. I just want to.
I have the recommends.
Oh, you have the recommends. Okay, I'll do mine tomorrow. Okay, go ahead.
I have a very special recommends. It's a classic film which I had not even heard about until recently, but I dug it up, watched it the other night. The movie is Ball of Fire with Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck, directed by Howard Hawks. Came out in 1941. It's a very amusing piece of casting, because you think of Gary Cooper,
written by Billy Wilder,
by Billy Wilder. Yes, his influence is apparent, and you think of Gary Cooper as the strong, silent type and everything. But in this film, he plays Professor Bertram Potts, who is a grammarian and lexicographer, and is part of a team of encyclopedists who live in this big mansion in New York City, and he becomes aware that his knowledge of American slang is completely out of the date. So he goes to a nightclub as part of a tour to figure out, how Americans are talking in 1941, where he encounters Barbara Stanwyck's character, the nightclub singer Sugar Puss O'Shea, and he invites her back to the mansion where he lives with the other encyclopedists, who are this just fantastic collection of old character actors. And it turns out she's engaged to a mob boss who's played by the completely underrated Dana Andrews. I actually looked him up after this movie, and it turns out he's been in a great many films and a very good
He
Golden
was
Age star.
fantastic, Laura and the Best Years of Our
Yeah.
Lives too, but he was a terrible alcoholic, and
Is
so
that
he,
right? Okay, so that
he
explains it.
ruined his own career through
Anyway,
drinking.
it's a completely charming movie. It's funny. There's some excitement. It's classic Hollywood. It's available for streaming on Peacock streaming service. If you have that, you can watch it for free. Otherwise, you have to pay some money on either Apple or Amazon. Just a couple things. First thing is Howard Hawks. Essentially, it's kind of a retelling of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and so the other encyclopedists are the dwarves. And so Howard Hawks stages these scenes with them so amazingly well. And he has these shots of where they're all in the frame, and the expressions on their faces and their reactions, they're just incredible. And the cinematographer of this film was Greg Toland, who was also the cinematographer on Citizen Kane, and who pioneered this use of deep focus where you can see far back in the frame. And so you see that in this. And so it's amazing staging. Something I'd only ever seen in John Ford movies, where Ford is very good at like having all these collections of faces, and you can see the expressions play off one another. You can see that here. The other interesting thing about this film, it's one of two films that Cooper made with Hawks that were released in 1941. The more famous film, and also an amazing movie, is Sergeant York, where Cooper plays Sergeant Alvin York, the initially a conscientious objector to American intervention in World War I, who then goes and serves in World War I and is an incredible war hero. And that film was Hawks and Cooper's way of saying, America, we need to ready ourselves because the war is going on in Europe and we're going to get involved. And Sergeant York was released on July 2nd, 1941. I looked up the original release date of Ball of Fire. It was released on December 2nd, 1941, 5 days before Pearl Harbor. But in any case, I really recommend both movies. But
it is
just a good time. Ball of Fire is
a fantastic movie, and it's worth noting that while cineasts, film historians would tend to say that John Ford, who won 93 Oscars, was the greatest classical director in Hollywood history. I think Howard Hawks unambiguously is the greatest because he was this rich kid from Indiana, very rich, very wealthy, well-educated, went off to war in World War I, came back, went to Hollywood, started directing. He made great Westerns, great dramas, great adventure movies, great screwball comedies, great comedies.
He made gangster movies too.
He made gangster movies. He made His Girl Friday, which is the greatest of all newspaper movies. He made Bringing Up Baby. He made Holiday. No, he didn't make Holiday. I'm sorry. He made these Rio Bravo. He made Red River. He made Only Angels Have Wings, which is the inspiration for Star Wars. The dogfight scene at the end of Star Wars is a direct homage to Howard Hawks's climactic scene in that movie. He could make anything. He was a writer. He was extraordinarily intelligent.
20th Century is another Hawks film, which is
20th
incredible
Century,
comedy.
Yes. He was an extraordinary talent and person, and he said something that is so untrue of his own movies, but is true of all movies, because he made so many, and of course, in that case, some of them are clunkers. But he said, if you have 3 good scenes in a movie, the movie is a success. And when you think about it, a great Howard Hawks movie is really good from beginning to end, and that's no way of judging him. Oh, of course, he also made To Have and Have Not and The Big Sleep. I mean, it's unbelievable, the range of this guy. And, like Ford couldn't make a comedy to save his life, for example. But he said 3 good scenes and you've got a movie that works. And it was not true of him. It is true. It is axiomatically true that if you have a movie in which people remember 3 scenes independently of each other, the rest of the movie can be garbage and the whole movie will be a gigantic. Does anybody remember, Avengers Endgame? The biggest box office movie of all time, people remember 2 or 3 moments in it, and they went back to see it 11 times. So this is like the best piece of film criticism ever done. It was done by a director, and Ball of Fire is fantastic, and it's adorable. The Seven Dwarves professors are adorable. It's an adorable, funny, crazy madcap movie. What a great recommendation. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Seth, and Madam John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.